Hi bitches, it's Shaaba, welcome back to my channel and thank you for clicking on another video. I am still bi. This coming out has nothing to do with my sexuality. It is to do with the fact that I have ADHD. Don't know why I did this. It's not a big moment. It's a realization that I'm feeling a need to talk about. I've been very backwards and forwards in two minds about whether I should even make this video, so bear with. I am a neurospicy. I have all of the beans in my head, and the reason I was so back and forth about making this video is because it's not something that I particularly wanted to address, but it's also something that I've been getting a lot of comments on, and so I felt that the best way to address that, I don't know why I'm nervous, is in the form of like an FAQ type thing. So why don't we just like jump right into it? For those of you who don't know, I guess the first question would be, what is ADHD? Because I used to think when I was younger, whenever I had the term ADHD, that it was to do with young boys, school kids, boys, hanging out windows, running around, causing a huge disruption and not being able to sit in their seats. And that can sometimes be what ADHD is, but it is not the extent of ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Try saying that 5 times really fast. And it's a neurodevelopmental issue that can lead to abnormal brain function, which basically means that as we are being formed in the womb, sometimes our brains can get a little bit miswired. They're miswired differently to most other brains, which affects the whole nervous system, and it can impact a whole host of things like memory, self-control, the way that we act, and the emotions that we feel. So basically how our brain functions, and because we use our brain surprisingly in pretty much every single freaking thing that we do, it can be very impactful. Having ADHD can be very impactful on all aspects of your life. So the 3 sort of like categories of ADHD that most commonly show up from what I've learned is inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. And that kind of falls into 2 categories of ADHD. You either have inattentive ADHD, or you have hyperactive and impulsive ADHD, or if you're super spicy and you like a good cocktail, you have combined ADHD, which is all 3 of them together, which is what I have. Fun times. So how do you get ADHD? Can it go away? ADHD is not contagious. It is a mental disorder, and it is also not curable. It can, however, be treatable, like it can be managed, and the way that people manage it is through coaching, like ADHD coaching, and also through medication if it's sort of like severe enough to require medication. And in terms of the coaching or like the social management of ADHD, people who have ADHD, especially those who aren't diagnosed until a little bit later, actually find that they have so many sort of management tools already, social management tools that they use without even recognizing it, without even realizing that that is what they're doing. And that might involve things like doing things that some people might consider really overboard in terms of like being really anal, or doing so many things in order to be organized just to meet deadlines or to get things done that other people might find really overboard or silly or excessive. It can also come across in like perfectionism and taking too much time to do things like that. Non-medicated ways to manage your ADHD, basically. But there is also medication for some people, and honestly, it is such a minefield. It's something that I'm still learning a lot about. There are like 2 broad categories that essentially fall into the sort of realms of stimulants or antidepressants. And I'm so glad that I've had such a lovely medical professional talking me through it, because the amount of misinformation that I've seen on the internet is a lot. And I think it sometimes doesn't necessarily stem from bad intentions as well. I think it's just like the complexities of having medication that helps your mental health. Unlike things like aspirin or paracetamol, I don't know why I went down the American route, but you know, like painkillers, there's a very obvious thing that it does, whereas for issues of mental health, it's so complex to be like, hello little pill, magically find a way to corner very certain functions of the brain and affect only those things, please, which of course never happens. There's so many side effects, there's so many different types of medication, there's so many brands within the types of medication, all of them work slightly differently, and it really is up to sort of like the person. It's so individual as to what works successfully, what dosage works successfully, and whether that even works like over a long period of time. There's a lot of trial and error with ADHD medication, as I'm learning. But overall, the idea is it can really help. Yeah, I've lost my bean, which is such a difficult thing for me to do. What are we talking about? Oh, the question was, how do you get it and can it go away? And I ended up talking about medications, but there you go. Well, no, I did say it can't go away. It can be managed. There we go. I found my bean again. It's lovely when that happens. But also, in terms of how you get it, nobody really knows. There's no sort of way that ADHD comes to be. There's a lot of research to suggest that it's genetic in some way and can be passed down sort of through families, and it's not something that you like can develop later on in life, or that comes in and out, you know, like allergies. Sometimes you can develop a gluten intolerance. You can't just develop ADHD. Something you either have from birth or you don't have it. And that concludes the boon. So, when and why was I diagnosed? Because I'm sure that you're not here for an informative session on ADHD. That's not what I'm trying to provide. I don't claim to be any kind of expert. I wanted to address it because I feel like it's already being addressed in comments, and I feel like it was the right thing to do. So, I was diagnosed a number of years ago now. It was a while pre-pandemic. I'm just going to use a pandemic as like the new BC AD. I feel like that's what we're doing now. Anyway, a couple of years pre-P, I was struggling. I was struggling with my mental health. I'm trying really hard to remember the boundaries of things that I want to share online, because I think it's so easy to overshare, and I'm constantly like, sharing helps people, so why not talk about things? But there are some things that I think are important to maintain some boundaries on and to keep a little bit private, because sometimes I think when you put information out there on the internet, people assume that they can therefore ask so much, and I feel kind of guilty sometimes, like I've done it to myself. If it's like something that I've chosen to speak about, to then be like, why are you asking me questions about this? Like it's stressing me out, you know? And so because some aspects of my mental health, and specifically ADHD management and sort of why I started in the first place, are things that still stress me out, because it's some things that I'm still learning about myself. It's some things that I'm still struggling with. I'm gonna like keep it quite top level. Basically, I had a number of issues that meant I was having a really hard time at work. I was struggling with a sense of routine. I was struggling with the jobs that I was in, and I had tried like multiple different jobs, and none of them were quite like sitting right. I seemed to have this problem that I couldn't understand it. I wasn't lazy. It's like one of the words that really frustrates me so much. People are like, you're just lazy. You just don't want to work. Well, guess what? None of us want to work. Like, I get it. I feel that too. But this was something more. I was so struggling in a way that I couldn't comprehend. And my loved ones were like, well, maybe it's anxiety. I don't understand. Like, it was causing so much like of an emotional reaction from me, and I found it so exhausting. I was just really struggling to do things that normal adults do, and I was getting very frustrated as to why. And honestly, ADHD was not even like in my top 100 reasons on a list of why this could possibly have been occurring. I didn't fully know what ADHD was. As I said, like my perception was always just rowdy boys hanging out of a window. That's like the one image I have of a boy that I knew who had ADHD, and that was so very far from me. Like, I was always a goody two-shoes. I was a straight A student. I was a straight A student for everything except for math, where I was really not good until some very strict Asian discipline and quite literal severe discipline measures meant that I had to get my head around it very quickly. I ate, slept, and breathed math, and ended up doing okay in maths too. But the reality is I really struggle with numbers. That's the one thing academically that like it just hurts my brain in ways that are like really debilitating. Actually, even to do with like memory and numbers. Anyway, I'd always been like very organised, and I never had a problem with having too many beans in my pants. Like, exercise did not come naturally to me. Going outside, doing PE classes, I fidgeted quite a lot. Like, everyone would always say, your brain has got so much on, because I'd always have like a little leg jigging, or my fingers that was, I guess for me, I don't know, I just saw it as like creativity leaking out of my body. Like, I was just playing piano constantly in the air. I always had something going on that was a bit fidgety. I was very sedentary as a child. I was a little potato, and I was very at peace with being on a couch. Do you know what I mean? And because ADHD wasn't something that was ever like picked up upon at school for me in particular, like I don't know, I just never even thought of it being a possibility. Because as I said, you don't like just get ADHD when you're older. I was sort of, it's not even that I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I had it in school and I just didn't notice. Like, it just wasn't even a word that felt like it belonged in my reality, you know, like I didn't think of it. But hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I can totally see now the aspects of like ADHD in my childhood and in my sort of like just growing years all the way to now. I do think that I had very many childhood traits that were very ADHD of me. Even if it wasn't having too many beans in my pants, I definitely had too many beans in my brain just all the time. Like, daydreaming was a big thing for me, having my fingers in too many pies, being very passionate about things and talking very fast and talking a lot. Fun fact, ADHD is actually really undiagnosed in women in particular, and do not get me started on people of colour and people of colour being diagnosed correctly in the relationship between POC and healthcare. But specifically to do with women and girls, ADHD shows up more in terms of inattentiveness as opposed to the hyperactivity and the impulsivity that more often shows up in boys. And so, especially as kids, that inattentiveness is very easy to be excused for just, being a child. Like, when you go to parent school evenings, parent-teacher evenings, what were the names of those things? Parents' evening? Yeah, it was parents' evening. When you go to parents' evening, my constant thing would be like, oh, Shaaba has so much potential. She's so good. She just needs to focus a little bit more, like, oh, she's so passionate. She just needs to focus a little bit more. It's always just like this, you silly distracted child who's always daydreaming. Whereas the boy hanging out the window, has a lot more sort of like, we need to manage this. What is going on here? It's, I guess, much easier to see it as being an issue. I don't know if this is making sense. I don't know if you're following my train of thought. But yes, in hindsight, I can see my ADHD traits growing up, and I can also see why they were excused because, she just likes spending time on things because she's such a perfectionist. She's late all the time because she's Asian. Have you seen the rest of her family? She talks so much, she's so passionate because she's bossy. She interrupts because she's so passionate. Like there was always an excuse, which I actually think also leads to, we'll talk about it more later, but this idea of like the self-doubt and the questioning post-diagnosis. But that is why I wasn't prepared for my diagnosis at all. I was just so frustrated in adulthood, feeling like I wasn't lazy, like I was willing to put work in, like I did put work into a lot of things. I don't know, I just felt really immature. Like I couldn't understand why my brain wasn't letting me do certain things that normal adults should just be able to do. And after being very frustrated with myself, Jamie suggested, my lovely partner, shout out, husband, cutie pie, #1 potato. He suggested that I go and speak to a GP, and I was like, you don't go to the GP for mental health issues. Don't be silly. They're just there for like broken bones and colds and stuff. And I was very wrong. I did end up going to see my GP after a little menti bee, and they were like, huh. And I was like, huh. And that's how my ADHD diagnosis started. So yes, I was diagnosed in my mid-20s. And then the pandemic happened and everything sort of shut down. I was referred to a specialist, but I understand the waiting lists now are even longer, but there was quite a waiting list generally. And with the pandemic in particular, everything was pushed back more. And I ended up being diagnosed by the specialist that I was referred to just after the lockdown lifted. The process itself for getting a diagnosis was also really long and quite arduous. I do think it's a little bit silly that the way that they get the people who are wired a little bit differently and therefore doesn't deal very well with long monotonous tasks is to get them to sit down and fill out a really, really long monotonous form to be like, oh yeah, you totally have ADHD. That was so much fun. I was totally not distracted at all. It was also really enlightening though too, because I had to do mine sort of like sitting in a room by myself, which for some reason I also find very difficult. I understand that there are terms now like body doubling, which is totally a thing. Like I don't mean to trivialize when I say it. It sounds so silly to me still. I have a lot of internal issues with the fact that this is something that I have to deal with. And I'm like, sorry, you're telling me that my brain doesn't function? It chooses not to do... Well, it doesn't choose. It is incapable of doing things unless there is somebody else in the room, even if they are doing literally nothing to do with you. Like, make that make sense, brain. Make that make sense. It doesn't make sense, but it's a thing. My point is, when I was filling out this form that I was absolutely struggling with, because it was pages and pages and pages long and it was very boring, there were definitely some moments where I was just like, sorry, you're asking me to answer this thing about myself, but like everybody feels that way, surely. Like, doesn't everybody get a little bit distracted? Doesn't everybody struggle to do things when there's someone else not in the room? And then I remember going back to talk about my experience with the form to Jamie and some of my friends, and they were like, yeah, no, I don't really feel like that. That's not something that I experience. Like, sure, they'll say there's like 3 tabs open in my head. I'm like, what, really? There's not 50 plus 2 songs at all times? That's not normal for you? So yeah, they do that, and then they do some paper interviews with 1 or 2 loved ones as well. I was asked to nominate a couple of people that knew me very well, both in childhood and now, and basically they were sent similar kind of like survey things that they had to complete so that it's not just your opinion on yourself, but sort of like a more objective, like an outside opinion that's still very familiar with your experience. And then I had a very in-depth session with a specialist, and I remember I was like, I cannot miss this appointment. I cannot miss this one. I wasn't very used to missing things anyway, but I was so nervous about missing things. And I actually ended up having two because after the first one, I had so many questions. I was writing this list down and she ended up replying, was just like, you know what, I think we need to have another session because this is clearly a lot and I want to make sure you are comfortable. And I was very grateful, actually. There were so many like eureka moments. There were so many moments that just made me feel a bit more like, I don't want to say empowered because I feel like that's the wrong word, maybe justified in some of the worries that I was experiencing. It's weird because it doesn't help me deal with the situations that I am facing, but knowing that there was a reason for it just made me feel a little bit better as to why, like a little bit more comfortable and at ease as to why it was happening, even if it meant I still had the same issues of working out how to resolve them. Does that make sense? Like, I guess like knowledge is power. Is that a thing? That's a thing. That's totally a thing. Whew. Do you like my top today, by the way? Just wanted to show you. I have this like little string tie on it, which is super cute and I love it a lot. But it also is so fun to play with. So I'm constantly like, there we go. Okay. All right. I've totally forgot what I was saying. Yes, it led me to some moments of like positive, like, aha. But it also led me to some not so great moments, which leads to, why did I need to do this video? I'm definitely still coming to terms with my diagnosis, with understanding what ADHD is and how it affects me, with understanding how to manage it and this like total minefield of medication. And honestly, with like a level of internal shame, which is so weird to me because I am like all about not being judgmental and I don't judge other people for dealing with issues of mental health or neurospiciness, not even a little bit. And I kind of feel like the level of shame that I have towards this diagnosis and understanding like this part of me and how it affects and impacts how I function is so much greater than the shame that I felt about being LGBT, which in some ways feels really bananas, but in other ways makes total sense because being LGBT plus is something that I can say like with total conviction isn't wrong. Like it doesn't make me wrong. It made me different and not wrong. And I know, I'm saying these words, right? And I'm like, I know this is the same with ADHD too. I know that being neurodiverse in any way is not wrong. It just means that you function differently in the world. But for me, it's taking me longer to realize that the way that it impacts myself and my ability isn't wrong because I see so many aspects that I'm still struggling with. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm using so many words and still not really getting my point across. So yes, this whole love-hate relationship with it is something that I really wanted to sort out in my head before I spoke about it online, but I share so much online, I'm struggling to keep a distance between the two, and I feel like it's something that you've noticed, hence me addressing it in a video. And the love side that I'm trying to nurture and I'm understanding a little bit more definitely comes from like that sense of freedom, the knowledge is power aspect of, you know, like now understanding that the things that frustrate me are happening for a reason. Like there is a reason that I am frustrating myself, and with the right treatment I can sort of help manage those things so that I frustrate myself less, right, and frustrate people around me a lot less as well. So you know, like the fact that I'm super organized but sometimes I leave the front door open is not just because I'm a total idiot. Cool. Or like the fact that I find myself getting really irrationally mad at some things and really impatient, particularly to loved ones, or you know, like I talk over people or I interrupt people or I dominate conversations. It's not just because I'm a blabbermouth and someone who's really bossy. Cool. Whilst it's great to have that understanding, it also doesn't stop me from doing all of those things. And in some ways, having this new knowledge of why it's happening kind of makes it more frustrating because I feel like it's so easy to sort of rely on it as an excuse. And it's not just something that I can very easily improve about myself. You know, like these flaws aren't something that I can just be like, oh, I'll work on it. Oh, I'll just be like less lazy. Just with a bit more motivation, I can do it, because that's not how it works with ADHD. It was kind of a bit of a slap in the face to try really hard to fit in and to be normal and kind. Like you always want to act appropriately, and it's frustrating and weird to know that these things that you're doing that can be really exhausting actually aren't working too well. Because when I went to go and speak to the GP and I was talking about these mental health issues, and he grabbed out like this initial form and was just like ticking the boxes to be like, does this happen? Does this happen? He was like, interrupting others, yes. Dominating conversation, yes. Speaking out of turn, yes. Fidgeting, yes. And I'm like, dude, you've known that I've existed for 10 minutes. Because I just think like wow, what are people seeing in me when I think I'm holding up like this mirror of normality and I'm interacting like everybody else? Like, I must seem like such an alien to people who don't know who I am. Oh, tiny violin though, like I'm not like, oh, woe me. I'm just, I guess, explaining some of the difficulties that makes it really hard for me to talk about, and kind of the bits that I'm really struggling with to be like at peace with myself and my diagnosis. All of that sense of empowerment and all of the questions that I thought I had answered by speaking to professionals also didn't last very long, as well as the sort of patronizing sort of reality of like, oh, right, I am really very obviously different to other people. I then looked into things more and I had more and more questions that didn't seem to be very consistent, which I guess makes sense for issues of the mind. It's not as easy as you break a bone, you fix it. And I guess it's not just issues in the mind, right? But like non-chronic things that can very easily go away by doing XYZ. There you go, it's done. The more I then looked into things like meds, the more scared I got, because the more different everybody's experiences seem to be. There were some people talking about really negative side effects of meds that they didn't quite understand, or finding it really difficult to come off, or how those side effects, especially because, you know, it can control things like hormones when you're talking about things like antidepressants, can just become so much bigger to manage as opposed to the isolated thing that is ADHD. And I had more questions, to be honest, because I actually experienced a lot of backlash from some of my loved ones. Not everybody, but there is a really big social stigma that comes with ADHD, specifically when you are not a schoolboy. When you're an adult, it, I guess, comes across as like quite childish and chaotic and silly to some people. I had like a couple of people be like, no, you don't have ADHD. You just need to focus more. You just need to concentrate. Like, you're fine. You're so successful. Like, look at all of the things that you've been able to do. You know, like, you run a business. It's not ADHD. It's your personality. It's very easy to, one, second guess if it's therefore something that you actually have. And then two, it's very easy to feel a lot of shame because there's so much denial, especially when it comes to things like taking meds. And three, when you experience that social stigma just from general society about things like mental health and mental disorders just generally, because people just don't like believing in things that they can't see. Apart from when it comes to things like religion, we can absolutely use that apparently to on to marginalized community groups. That's not this video though. My point is, I think it's very easy to feel a lot of shame coming from different directions, as well as my own internal shame that I'm dealing with as well. So I'm still navigating all of that, and I know that I shouldn't. I love you. I know that so many of you gorgeous peaches are like, oh, but I don't want you to feel this way and you don't deserve to feel this way. I know this too. Like, theoretically, I totally get this, but it's still something that I feel, and I have to be honest about it. Like, it's not something that easily goes away. I think a lot of that shame is also to do with like dealing with things that my past self went through and sort of wasn't allowed to do. So I think about times when I was like disciplined very harshly for things that now that I know were not in my control, because I had like tics that I couldn't control, whether they be verbal or physical. And I guess I don't want to like again go into too much detail, but it's a real mind, to be honest, to be told like, no, these things are in your control, you must get a hand of them, you must sort it out, right? Like growing up and having these things like literally beaten out of you, to then realize that, oh no, actually there is a reason and it's not something that you can deal with by yourself. And sometimes even the meds don't work, but like, hey, be proud. And definitely a lot of the shame that I'm feeling is to do with the fact that I still feel so inadequate now. You know, like not being able to use a debit card properly, or being concerned that I'm like leaving the house and leaving a door open. Like, who the frick does that? Like, it's just so silly. Or, you know, not being able to have a normal conversation where other people are just like, is she okay? She's really intense. She's really chaotic. Like, it really questions my ability to just life, especially when I'm in a particularly stressed or like distracted headspace. I know when I'm in a good state of mind and when I'm not stressed out, I can do things really well, but sometimes when things are really overwhelming, I'm realizing that overwhelm and that sort of like snowball effect is to do with these other things that I'm not in control of. And it makes me think, you know, like, am I going to be able to drive properly? Am I going to be able to be a good partner? Am I going to be able to be a good parent? And it just makes me feel like a bit of a failure sometimes. And I don't take failure very well. So this is my internal struggle. And my biggest issue that I have with this ADHD management and how it sort of like manifests is the fact that everything that you realize about it seems to be a retrospective realization. Do you know what I mean? There are small things where I'm like, I know that sometimes if I go on my phone, I'm going to get stuck for a while. So I really shouldn't do that. Or like, I know if I open my emails, I'm going to get really, really stuck. So I know that if I've only got like 10 minutes, I probably shouldn't do that. But apart from those things that you learn from experience, because it impacts so many different things, it's not something where you can see the consequences in advance. Does that make sense? It's probably gonna be a really bad metaphor, but like if you break your foot, right, and then you try and use your foot, like you put it down on the ground, you go ow, because it hurts in the moment. Like, you know not to do the thing that is going to cause you inconvenience and discomfort and just frustration in the long term. Whereas with ADHD, I feel like the times that I realize, like, oh, I've had an ADHD moment, I'm like really messed up here, it's when the thing has already happened and I can't, because I'm not a Time Lord in a TARDIS, I can't go back in time to stop myself from getting really distracted before leaving, or from saying a really stupid thing or acting in a way that, you know, I'm now hearing from other people, they're like, oh, she's a bit weird. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I guess I could contact them afterwards, but you know, if you're in a meeting or whatever and you have feedback that you've behaved in a way that somebody doesn't expect you to because you're just super chaotic, it's then weird to be like, oh, by the way, I heard you were shit talking me. And that chaos, it's medically diagnosed. I feel like I'm sounding really negative about the whole thing. I'm not. I'm just, I guess, like, I'm trying to be honest with why I'm not talking about it too much, but there are definitely some positives from having the diagnosis too, and some elements of feeling really proud, you know, like speaking to the specialist in particular, being like, oh, like, this is actually a really big achievement. Like, a PhD is a big achievement anyway, but it's really big for someone who has ADHD. Like, you seem to have managed that really well, especially considering the fact that you didn't know that these were issues that you had, or like why you had the issues at least. So like, I am really proud of myself for being able to run a business even though I couldn't hold down a job. I am really proud of myself that I'm able to get videos out on like a regular basis, even though sometimes I really struggle to do things to like a normal schedule, and know that I will work at like 3-4 a.m. to make sure that I get that done, because it's something that's really important to me. So yeah, there are definitely some positives to the diagnosis, absolutely. I don't want to put anyone off or feel like, make anyone feel like it's really bad. I'm just talking about my personal experience, because ADHD is just not something that I know enough about at all. Every week I'm still coming across new terms. Every time I meet other people, I'll often preface it now and I'll be like, by the way, I have ADHD, so you know, if I'm really dominating conversation or get distracted, I'm not being rude, I don't mean to. If I'm multitasking, it's not because I'm not interested in what you're saying, it's just my brain. It's just my spicy brain. But because I'm still learning so much, and even when I'm having conversations, I just went to a cafe this week and I went to speak with someone and they were talking about, was it echolalia or something? I can't remember the term, but it's a big term, like a small thing about something that I do when I stream in games. And I was like, oh gosh, that's ADHD too. So I decided that it wasn't something that I wanted to talk about because I didn't know enough about it to feel like I could talk about it, you know? It's not saying that I shy away from the label, like, I am Shaaba, I have ADHD. It's not a problem, like, totally. But I'm also saying it as like a total rookie to the game, you know, who's still trying to figure life out. And I also find myself being more vocal about it just passively online, especially in things like streaming, or sometimes, you know, I'll do a video and I'll be like, oh, sorry, having a bad ADHD day. And that's because as I'm coming to terms with myself and my neurospiciness, I'm definitely finding myself talking about it a lot more and wanting to talk about it a lot more, especially in those moments where I'm feeling like some kind of, not pride, but like comfort in knowing that it's why I'm doing things a little bit differently, if that makes sense. And it's that being vocal about it that normalizes it for me anyway. I used to say to Jamie, like a couple of years ago, like when it dominated conversation, like even now, to be fair, I was talking to him about it yesterday, and it's like, yeah, I do feel like it comes up a lot, and it does. And sometimes it can feel like super overwhelming, or like it's all encompassing and it's like it's all I talk about. I feel like that vegan in the room, you know, that stereotypical vegan that like just won't shut up about it. Or like when I first came out as bi, being like, oh, I'm bi, like just telling everyone I knew, like, I'm bi. But this is more than a silly, you know, joke that's being mean to people who are just choosing to live a certain lifestyle. And in many ways, it feels a lot more than my bisexual identity and label, because, as I said, it affects everything, not just my sexuality, which is a core part of my identity too, of course, but doesn't affect absolutely every single thing I do, despite what internet memes and culture might suggest. I think it's because there's so many learning moments of having ADHD that are just like, oh, I'm doing this because of ADHD. Oh, I used to do this because of ADHD. Like so many epiphany moments that I slowly feel like I'm becoming more comfortable with my spicy ADHD brain. So yes, I do feel it useful to talk about it more. I guess like I also think it's useful for you to know, because the other comments that I get quite a lot are like, wow, Shaaba, you talk so fast, or wow, Shaaba, you digress a lot, because I cannot tell you the number of comments I get that are like that, like, you should do your videos this way, or, you know, have you ever considered taking a breath? Sometimes they're like, oh, you edit your breaths out, and sometimes I do edit like big breaths out, but often I just talk really fast. And I guess another reason why I think it's useful for you to know that I have ADHD is because routine is something that I really, really struggle with. And I am so grateful. And I realize the privilege I have in doing fun things for a living. Like, I love what I do. I love that I can call this little bubble of the internet part of my career. I think it's bananas in the best way. I feel like I'm living a dream. I'm very Lizzie McGuire of me, but I don't always get it down perfectly. And it's something that I do still really struggle with. So if you see my content bounce around a lot, particularly in terms of like what I do and in terms of when I upload, I find it really hard to stick to a schedule, and I find myself getting really passionate about some things and like jumping into them and then not having the time to do everything that I want to do. So it's really hard to stick to a thing and do it consistently, especially when now you have to do shorts and long form and shorts on like so many different platforms. And like, don't get me wrong, it's so much fun, but the admin as well, like sometimes, you know, when they say like when you do what you love as a job, sometimes you cannot love it as much. There's so much of that goes on that I think people don't like really understand the full extent of what it means to like be a creator. Oh, sorry. There's just a lot. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do in very quick amounts of time, and I'm not very good at that. But I have found things I genuinely really, really love and I don't want to let go of. And I really hope that by explaining this, you can have some patience, and I would super love your support in being able to continue doing those things I really love. Music in particular is something that I've really grown in confidence with this past year. And it's not something that I want to be one of those things that Shaaba's stupid ADHD brain doesn't allow me to bring to fruition. You know, like I'm so committed to this, particularly music, but even things like just gaming and content creation in general. And sometimes you can love something so much, like ADHD is just not fair, because like it can either make you not be able to stick to routines to do things consistently enough to be successful, but then it also has the opposite effect of if you're enjoying things too much, you really hyperfixate on things to the point where you then can't sleep, can't eat, can't carry out basic social hygiene, can't just generally life, which is really annoying. So it's either that I'm unable to do it or I'm getting far too invested in it that I literally can't do anything else, which makes the whole career thing kind of difficult. And so I humbly request from you some patience and some support, especially with music, because I use my social media platforms to keep myself accountable, and I love it so much. I love it so much. I really want this to be the thing that I can treat with the respect that it deserves to have in my life. In light of me sharing this, I should probably also set some boundaries. Obviously you're very entitled to do whatever you want on the internet, whether it be my corner of the internet or anywhere else that you happen to be. You do you, boo. Just to let you know, there are some things that I do not appreciate. I don't tolerate any kind of unkindness. As I say at the end of every single video, be kind, have a great day. There are definitely some things that I will just flat out delete or not respond to positively if I see it happening in light of the information that I brought out. And one of those things that really scares me and can make me feel really frustrated, to be honest, is non-medical professionals providing advice or diagnosis to people online. Like, I find that really tricky. I've been on the receiving end of that so much, and people just don't realize like how much their words can play on the minds of some people, and especially with things like neurodivergency that are like so nuanced and so complex, right? Like, it's sometimes you can just be being distracted. Sometimes you can have ADHD and you can never quite communicate your entire life experience in one YouTube comment. Who'd have thought? I often see so many times a lot of people feeling like it's their prerogative to label people in certain ways as autistic, as having ADHD, as being neurospicy in some way, as being a certain sexuality. It may even be, you know, from the Am I the Drama posts that we look at. Like, when we are not medical professionals, I just think we should be staying in our lanes and being careful with the impact that our words can have on other people. Words very much linger, and we do not need the words of thousands of people lingering up here when there's already so much going on. Trust me. So if I could very kindly ask people to be kind and to stay in your lane and to not say things with conviction, like it's totally fine to share experiences and to ask about experiences. Like, I totally encourage conversations and discussions, but let's not be diagnosing people if we don't have the authority to do that. And secondly, I just think we need to be a bit careful when we do use moments like that, because it shouldn't be our responsibility, whilst it might be coming from like a really good intentioned place. But, you know, trying to say that everybody has ADHD because of this really small interaction that you have with just like one small segment of somebody's life, it can not only lead to people having personal complexes, but just cause like a general society eye roll where there's just so much misinformation, and it kind of like trivializes the experience and the perception for people who really do and who really struggle with some things, which just in turn like increases the stigma a lot more. And then my final boundary, which I guess like falls under a general question of like, would I be making content about ADHD stuff? I'm just letting you know that I'll do that on my terms. You are very welcome to like suggest things that you want to suggest or ask for things that you want to ask. I never want to stop that, but don't be offended if I don't answer things or get like really personal about certain experiences. As I said, like, I have this thing about saying things online and other people being like, oh, well, now I own this information about you. You've spoken about it. So one, you must be an authority, and two, you owe me all the information about this thing. That's not the case. Shaaba, working hard with the boundaries and the settings of the boundaries and the lives and the boundaries. We're saying with conviction that information that is given about like personal life is done so on my terms, which I feel is very fair. I'm not going to be afraid to talk about it, and I've already put up like little reels, like a reel, that I was just like, yeah, I'm feeling like more confident addressing this aspect of myself. So know that when I am talking about it, it's not being done with some sort of like professional lens at all, but just with the sense of trying to understand and be at peace with all aspects of my identity. And you're totally welcome to ask questions, but please don't take it personally if I don't answer, specifically if we're doing things like streaming or if I don't respond to certain comments. I think that's it. This has been a really long freaking video. I'm so sorry, but there you have it. There's Shaaba with too many beans, chaotic. If I act chaotic or temperamental, it may just be because I'm having a spice brain day, and that is great to be aware of and to know. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a thumbs up, subscribe, yada yada. Lots of people do think that they're subscribed, to be fair, and are not. So if you've made it to the end of this video and you'd like to check, I'd be very grateful if you could take a look and then press that little subscribe button. Super helps me out. Thank you for your patience and support. That is the end of the video. I'll see you next week. Be kind and have a great day. Bye.